Hi, we're here at the Lord's Land in our greenhouse. Some of you old timers remember we always had a greenhouse on the back of Big House, and it was in pretty bad repair, so we completely took it down, put up a new one. You can see we used big old repurposed beams, repurposed windows, and we made it a greenhouse again, except now it's a classroom. And so it's for accelerated growth in people's lives and their spirits. We do our Spirit and Truth Bible seminar in here, a 40-day immersion, experiential immersion in Scripture. And actually now we're using it as an actual greenhouse because during the shelter-in-place order, we don't have schools running, we don't have retreat guests coming in. So we're getting our gardens going, and we are using this to get our started. So it's a little cluttered right now, but it's just a cool space, and so I wanted to share some things from here. Last week I got some good feedback on the first installment on Thanksgiving, and I wanted to continue with that this time. Some people mentioned a great book, Prison to Praise, and I think there was a whole series of those praise books. And the whole thesis was that we can shift the circumstances in our life, not by fighting against them, but by praising God in those circumstances. And so it was very similar to what I was saying last week. So I'm going to actually go a little further, but I'm also going to make a little bit of a distinction today. And I want to talk about a passage of Scripture. It's a classic passage of Scripture, Romans 8:28. So let's just look at what King James Version says. It says, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose." Okay, now that's the King James Version. Now I've put right beneath it the Geneva Bible translation. The Geneva Bible was an English Bible. It was translated 50 years before the King James. It was actually a very good translation. It became the dominant translation. In its time, it was the Bible that most of the early American separatists and Puritans brought over with them. It was the Bible used by Protestants in England. Now, what we know about Geneva, some of you history buffs will remember that the city of Geneva was founded by John Calvin. So it was basically a theocratic city-state in the early Reformation. So the big guy, John Calvin himself, was there, and he was both the civil leader and the spiritual leader of that community. And I think part of the amazing things that have happened there in Geneva, that early Protestant movement should get some credit for. So I'm not dinging Calvin or the Geneva Bible, but I think we would admit that Calvin is known for one particular theological emphasis that emphasizes God's choice, God's sovereignty, God's will, and de-emphasizes human free will and human choices. So the King James Bible followed the earlier Geneva Bible. So look at this. "Also we know that all things work together for the best unto them that love God, even to them that are called of his purpose." Very similar, with the exception of a preposition or two, and maybe one vocabulary word. It's the same verse. It's the same, almost the same translation. So I wanted to point that out because I'm going to question this translation a little bit. I think the King James Bible is a great Bible. I love the flow of the language. As I said, the Geneva Bible was the best English translation of its day. But the point I want to make is not only did the King James Bible follow the Calvinistic Geneva Bible, the later translations into English, very good translations like the New American Standard Bible, also followed the King James Bible because it had become so much part of our culture and our language. If you read the translator's notes, the preface at the beginning of the New American Standard Bible, when they talk about their translation criteria, they specifically say, wherever the King James Version's reading of a passage was permissible. So in other words, unless we felt like there was a reason not to translate it that way, we followed the King James reading of a particular verse. Okay, so here we have a New American Standard Bible. It says, "We know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God and those who are called according to his purpose." Now, that's a little better because My problem with the King James Version is it's almost fatalistic. We have all things working together for good. It's just that it leads you into this que sera, sera, whatever will be, whatever happens is somehow mysteriously manifesting the decrees of God. That's good Islamic theology. I don't think that's very good Christian theology. Okay, the ESV, which is also a great, that's actually the Bible I most ordinarily just read from, but look at how they translate it. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. So we have these translations that have kind of embedded in our minds this idea that we need to embrace this, that all things just are working together for good. This is that anything that happens is really what was meant to happen. And I don't think that's true. And actually, I think if we look deeper at this scripture, we'll see that. I remember when I was in college, we were required to go to these chapel meetings. And I don't remember very many of these chapel meetings from my Christian college, but I remember this one because the man who shared was very real and very raw in what he shared. And he shared how that his daughter, a small girl, had drowned in, not even in deep water, in shallow water at a beach, or I believe it was a lake, had drowned. And it was just obviously a tragic event in his life and in his family's life. And it really damaged his faith. And one of the things that damaged his faith the most were well-meaning Christians that would come up to him and say, listen, all things work together for the good. God must mean something good. The reason this happened is because this is really all for the best. And it just really hurt him and damaged his conception of God and drove a wedge between him and God at a time when he most needed the comfort that would be available in God's love. And it was over a period of years that it sent him into the wilderness spiritually. Until one day he was somewhere, I forget where he was, and there just happened to be a Bible there. And it was a New International Version, NIV. And he flipped it open to Romans 8:28. And he looked at it, and the first word changed his life. So come over here and see how they translate it. Okay? It's not exactly the first word, but it's the first word in the phrase. And it says, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. In all things. To me, that's the most critical thing. And actually, I could bring probably a half dozen modern English translations where that is the way they're beginning to translate it. And it really is a better translation. In all things, God works for the good of those who love him. This is a book called God's Strategy in Human History by Roger Forster and Paul Marston. I met Roger Forster in England. He founded the Ichthus movement. It's a house church movement in England, very influential there. The Jesus March came out of this movement, and great theologian and a real man of the Spirit, believed in the supernatural, and yet had an incredible intellect and scholarship. You can see that the foreword to this book is written by F.F. Bruce, which is pretty extraordinary because F.F. Bruce is a heavyweight New Testament scholar, but he's also quite reformed in his outlook, Calvinistic and reformed in his outlook, and this book is not. This book is taking a very different approach to its subtitle, which is God's Sovereignty and Man's Responsibility. What I found in here was literally a footnote, but it's a long one. It's about a page-long footnote here that goes into Romans 8:28. And so I'm not going to try to read from this, but if you want to question my scholarship on this, go here, and I think it'll help answer the questions. But that in all things is really crucial. Because I'm not wanting to demythologize this verse. I'm not wanting it to take this verse away from people that it's been an anchor of hope for them. But what I am wanting to do is take the character of God back from fatalism and from people who are giving God credit for things that he doesn't take credit for. So in all things, God works. You can be thankful, and you should be thanking God that in all things, in every circumstance, even when it's literally sinful, evil, initiated by the devil himself circumstances, even in that circumstance, God is moving into it dynamically, actively, to bring good out of it for you. And my wife Cindy likes to say that God is so good at redeeming things that he messes up our theology. And in other words, he brings so much good out of it that when you look back on that season or that circumstance, you actually think maybe, well, God must have created that intentionally because so much good came out of it. God in all things is at work for your good, and he's really good at doing that. But there's more here. So if you look, I kept the footnote here. This is in the NIV. I left the little translator's footnote here. It says, this is the footnote where it says, who have been called according to his purpose. It says, or, in other words, you could translate it a different way, that in all things God works together with those who love him. Together with those who love him to bring about what is good. Now, you remember with the King James, keep it here. Let's look at the King James. It says, we know that all things work together. Okay, that together is in the verse. Okay, it's in the Greek, and it's a word called synergeo, or the same word we get synergy from, or when two things work together. Okay, so then that translator's note is trying to figure out where to put that synergeo, the synergy. And he says, to work together with those who love him to bring about what is good. That is what I learned from this footnote. Okay, the footnote here makes very clear that you really need to translate it that way. And it's very clearly saying that God is not just working circumstances together, but God is working in all circumstances with us. That's the key thing. That's where the synergy comes in, is our response. And I think what I was talking about last week is a big part of that. Thanksgiving, keeping the right attitude, not doubting God's faithfulness, actually actively thanking him in all circumstances, brings that synergy of cooperation between us and God's desire to move into that situation and work. Okay? So let's look at, I just grabbed 3 verses where this word synergy, synergeo, is used. So if you want to come in here and take a look. 1 Corinthians 3:9, for we are co-workers in God's service. That's synergeo, the synergy, co-workers in God's service. You are God's field, God's building. So this is talking about different Christians co-working together, different followers of Jesus that are working together and are co-workers in the field, in the work of the Lord. Now, that's really cool. I remember a management book a few years ago that talked about synergy, and it became a catchword for a while. But the idea is when the whole is more than the parts of the sum. So you have a team, and your contributions to the work of the team or the ministry aren't just addition. You're not just, I'm doing my part and you're doing your part, which is great. But you can get to a place where you actually have synergy, where we are multiplying each other. We're not just adding to what we're doing as a team and I'm doing my part, but we're actually, my contribution multiplies the effectiveness of your contribution. That's synergy. Okay, let's look at this other verse where that synergeo appears. 2 Corinthians 6:1. As God's co-workers. Now look at that. God's co-workers. Now we're not co-working with each other. We're co-working with God. As God's co-workers, we urge you not to receive God's grace in vain. And then I love this one best of all, Mark 16:20. So this is Jesus and his disciples. It says, the disciples went out and preached everywhere, and the Lord worked with them. That's the words, that synergeo, the synergy. The Lord worked with them and confirmed his word by the signs that accompanied it. So he's talking about the disciples went out and they were doing miracles. God and the Lord worked with them. There was that synergy of God's work through obedient servants going out, and miracles happened. So that's what I want to say to you. In every circumstance, COVID-19, whatever other thing is going on in your life, God is not necessarily the author of that thing. But in that circumstance, we can be confident that God is already moving into it with the intention to bring good out of it for us, and that we have an opportunity to co-labor with him through our thanksgiving, through our obedience, through listening to him in that situation, through searching his word to know how to respond. Our response, together with God's intention in that situation to bring out good, is the synergy that does amazing things, that redemptive synergy that makes us look back on a circumstance and literally messes up our theology and makes us think, oh, that's exactly what should have happened. All that horrible circumstance, God brought so much good out of it that I'm glad it happened. And so anyway, I think that's what it means.